there's no way of me knowing if I'm a good fit for anybody unless I do my homework and understand what the pain points is. No one cares about what you do. They want to know what problem you can solve.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. My name's David Knack, Director of Sales and Partnerships with Ava, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who have impressive resumes and have earned a lot of respect. So I thought it would be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of their biggest mistakes they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. Hey everybody, we're here with another episode of Home Care Hindsight. Joining me today on the show is Adam Corcoran, who is owner of Elevation Marketing. Adam, thanks for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm excited.
Well, I'm super excited to talk with you. For people who aren't familiar with you or your work, how would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I am the owner of Elevation Marketing. We are a full-service marketing agency, especially looking at printing, promotional products, apparel, and graphic design.
Awesome. You know, what I thought was really interesting when we first met was that your journey into running Elevation Marketing was kind of was not the typical way that people start a business. And so, you know, I'd love for you to share a little bit about kind of your backstory and how you ended up where you are today.
Sure. So some people don't know, I actually have a 10-year career in home care. Back in early teens, I started working for a home care agency and had a long road of business development, sales, marketing. And it was actually during COVID when Elevation Marketing was born. And I'll tell that story. So I remember like yesterday, it was the second week of March in 2020. And we were sitting around table at our office and talking about what's going on and how we're going to continue to market. And I literally said, two things are going to happen. Either we're going to take the back seat and let this thing pass over, or we're really going to rise up to the top and be a resource for the community. As a graphic designer, I said, we need to create collateral around this. So I created a one-page flyer that spoke specifically of why home care was so relevant during this uncertain time. And we just went to market. We printed like 5,000 and we just continued to execute. And no joke, we were so busy. We were in hospitals and rehabs giving these flyers out. And it was so impactful because I would say we almost doubled our business during COVID.
It's crazy.
And it's crazy, right? Because so I was a part of a whole bunch of Facebook groups for home care owners. And, you know, I'm seeing all these things like, I'm going to lose my business. I can't get into any of my accounts anymore. And like, here I am, like, we're dropping flyers off in the parking lots of these accounts. Like, I was like, and we're doing very well. So I reached out to Greg Mazza, the administrator of that group at the time. I said, hey, Greg, like, there's a lot of negative energy going on. Like, we're seeing the complete opposite. I said, I'm happy. Like, I'll show you the flyer that I'm using that we're executing and doing really well. I was like, and I'm happy to do it for anybody in the community, like just customize it for them. And he's like, okay, yeah, go for it. So that night, no joke, I remember I posted in the group, I said, hey, everybody, I know it's kind of a crazy, uncertain time right now. I said, but I'm using this one-page flyer, and I posted it. I said, if you're interested in getting it, just shoot me a message and I'll customize it to your logo, your colors, your phone number, website, what have you, and for free. I said, there was no catch. Like, I was genuinely just saying, like, I want to help the community.
Yeah.
And no joke, I had no idea what was going to happen. Like, within 24 hours, I had over 200 requests. My inbox was just flooded. So much so, like, Greg called me the next day and he's like, hey, do you want me to like pull this post down? He's like, this is just crazy. I don't know how you're keeping up. And I was like, no, in the grand scheme of things, like, it doesn't take that much time. Well, shortly after I'm giving all these digital files to all these home care owners, a lot of them started coming back to me saying like, hey, where do I get this printed? And I'm like, I don't know, a local print shop, Staples, wherever. And then like, by like the 10th person, I was like, I have an idea. So literally that is a time where actually the business that is started as called as home care flyers. No joke, we're just printing and designing flyers for home care agencies. So it was as linear as you could think.
Right.
But then a lot of people would start coming back to me and asking like, where do we get our promotional items? Can we do uniforms? And it really, the business blossomed from that. So it was a really, really cool experience of taking something that was genuinely like just to be a good partner of the community and turning it into a business in a very quick, short time. So we did rebrand to Elevation Marketing in 2022, but primarily we work with healthcare organizations, home care specifically, in the printing and graphic design promotional item world.
I love that. That's a really unique story. And it's funny because just trying to help and do the right thing, you did like my favorite sales play, which is called a lead magnet, which is give people something for free that they'd pay for elsewhere.
Yep.
And then, they've got all kinds of other needs that if they need that, then they probably also need these sorts of things. I don't think you intended to do all of that, but you executed like what people spend thousands of dollars and hours and stuff to conceptualize. You just did kind of intuitively, which is cool.
Yeah, and recognizing the gap in the market, right? As I went on and the business grew, I knew that there was a bigger gap than I once realized. So my job was to create an environment, a company to bridge that gap.
Yeah, man, just being in tune with if people need this, then they might also need this and that, and being able to just take that kind of feedback. That's something that sales teams often are not good enough at, is hearing that feedback from the customer, from the market, and saying, that's interesting, that's confusing, that's unexpected. What's behind that? And really being curious and just kind of digging a little bit more. And there's some huge opportunities that exist out there. Great. Well, on my podcast, I don't do a whole lot of small talk, and I just want to get right into things and ask people, what kind of person are you? You typically can't do that. On my podcast, you can. And so in order to ask you the question, what kind of person are you? I want to know what job you would be unbelievably bad at.
Oof. Well, I mean, actually it's interesting. I just had this conversation with my wife not too long ago. In the Corcoran household, we have handyman projects that are not done by us. I would be the worst, like, handyman construction person. If I can change a light bulb in the Corcoran house, it's like we applaud and we like celebrate, because no joke, I am not handy. I mean, I think I have a toolbox that I maybe opened like 3 or 4 times in my life. So yeah, I definitely would not be a good handyman. But I told my wife, I said, look, we got married and I knew I married you knowing that you didn't cook, and you married me knowing that I can't do anything handy.
That's awesome. Adam, you're here because you've built a pretty impressive brand and business in this space. You have continued to grow and serve, some pretty big other organizations, brands in this space. So you've got a great resume, but we're not here to talk about the resume. We're here to talk about the big mistake that you've made that changed the way that you think about your business, about your life. And so what's your big mistake?
Gosh, I remember it like it was yesterday. It was early 2013. I was brand new. When I say brand new to the home care industry, kid you not, like weeks into my first job being an account executive for a home care franchise here in Southwest Florida. And I had the opportunity of having an in-service with social workers. Now, mind you, and it's important to know this, I was the 5th account executive in 3 years. So I'm coming into an environment where they're seeing so much turnover. Our company at that time probably wasn't really taken too seriously. And then you have this green person coming to do this in-service. So I go and do my spiel, right? And I've learned so much about like sales and delivery since then. But I'm just going on and on and on about how we're the best and this and that. And now, mind you, I have like really little knowledge of the industry. So I get through like the 20, minute presentation. It's typical sales and service, talk about our key points, our differentiators, and then open it up for Q&A. I start getting questions about like how we support with SNFs and ALFs. And, our industry uses terminology, acronyms that if you're not in it and you're new to it, you like just might have no clue on what that is. So just picture this. I'm on like kind of this stage in front of probably about a dozen to 15 social workers, and they're asking me these hard questions about like, well, when someone transitions to an ALF, how do we support them? And if there's anything to be said about being able to like pivot and get through a very challenging question, I honestly, to this day, still don't really realize how I got through those questions, because ALF, SNF, if you think about it, SNF, SNF, skilled nursing facility, like if you don't know that's what it stands for, like how do you even respond? So how I got out of that conversation is beyond me. But I remember, getting into the in my car in the parking lot, like taking a sit back and like I'm like writing down all of these things that they were saying, and I'm like, I really need to find help, like and ask for guidance. So it was an eye-opening experience for me, because someone in a sales role, especially a guy, like, right, we don't ask for help, like we get the piece of furniture and we try to build it without the instructions. Like that's just what we do. But the reality is I learned very quickly that asking for help, asking for guidance was going to be necessary for me to be able to continue and be successful in the market. CCRC, right? Who would know what a CCRC is unless you actually worked in this world? So it was a mistake, but I look at mistakes as opportunities to grow. So it was a good, humbling experience to say, okay, I really need more help.
I think everybody who's been in a sales role, and this is probably true for other seats in the agency, in this industry, but I know this acutely as somebody who's been in sales. Every person has had the meeting where they leave the meeting and they blacked out like 2/3 of the way through, and they're like, how in the world did I make it out of there alive? And you just go into fight or flight and you're panicked and it's horrible. And then you go and you sit in your car, and you're in Southwest Florida, and you're waiting for the air conditioner to cool it down enough that you're not about to die. Yeah. And you're thinking, okay, I hated the way that felt. What can I do to never feel that way again? Yep. I remember mine. It was my first sales role, and I left a sales call with a pretty large account that had a presence in, 30 or 40 states across the U.S. and had a bunch of different kind of channels and some funding sources and all that kind of stuff that we typically wouldn't have access to. And we left the meeting. We get in the car. My manager's with me, and he says, how do you think that meeting went? I was like, oh, it's great. It was great. First time salesperson, happy ears. And he goes, what was the next step? I had no idea. Not a clue. I was like, from that day on, we do not leave any sales calls without a next step, defined, agreed to, and ideally on the calendar. And it's one of those things that you just feel so caught out, so exposed, like you've got little fig leaf that you're covering yourself with. And, what do I need to do to never feel that way again?
Right.
For new people who are new, for maybe people who are more established, what are the best kinds of things that they can do to make sure that they're really well prepared for these kinds of in-services with social workers, with discharge planners, with those kinds of people?
I think it's about, one, just being honest with ourselves, right? Understanding our knowledge base and being prepared. The reality is like when you're going into an environment like that, whether it's an in-service or a health fair or, whatever it is doing the legwork on the front end, understanding the position of the meeting, understanding the pain point. Gosh, I can't tell you. And even that first in-service, like now looking back, I was like, gosh, that was horrible. Like all I did was like blah, 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 blah. I didn't even know what their pain points were. So how can I, like, truthfully, and I mean this even fast forward to today, like, how do I know how I can help them if I don't even know what their problem is? So, I mean, even in my role today, it's like, if there's no way of me knowing if I'm a good fit for anybody unless I do my homework and understand what the pain points is. No one cares about what you do. They want to know what problem you can solve, right? So it's about taking the time and being intentional to really unpack that. Gosh, early on in my sales career, I learned very quickly, like, I really didn't start talking about what I did until like my third visit. And people are like, well, what do you mean? I said, my first 3 visits were really understanding who they are, what their needs are, so then I can come up with a positioning statement of how I could bridge their gap.
Yeah. What were some of those questions? Because I think one thing that makes me crazy being on the receiving end of some sales calls is when you feel like you're getting 20 questions to death. Hey, how many discharges do you do in a week? And what kinds of patients are you seeing? And what's their payer profile? And I'm like, well, aren't you supposed to be adding value to my life? I'm just telling you a whole bunch of stuff. And so what are some of your go-to questions that you feel like really build the relationship and some rapport and some trust?
Well, the reality is majority of the accounts that you're going to go into, one, you have to identify even if they have a knowledge base of what home care services does, right?
Sure.
So, I mean, one of my first questions is, do you currently utilize home care services for your discharging patients or your residents at your community? Or, you're like, if you're talking to a doctor, any of your patients, like, just understanding their knowledge level of what our industry does. And that's why I said I don't span those questions over like here's my list of questions. You know what I mean? Like, it was more of a like building a relationship. And let me pull a little stuff out every time I had a visit. Because no one wants to feel like they're being like interrogated or questioned, but that information is crucial for us to be able to then go back. But I like what you said earlier. I already had my next 3 visits already planned out, whether it's on the calendar or not. And that's why, like, I rarely ever went in with all my collateral and like just plopped it down on the desk, right?
Sure.
Because I wanted a reason to go back. You have to, you always have to be 3 visits ahead in your mind.
Yep, totally makes sense. Well, and I would guess, not having done any of these flybys myself, I would guess you've got time for one good question before they're busy and need to get back to their thing.
And especially if it was an account that is using home care,
right?
I would ask a very simple question. Tell me an experience where you used home care and it was not a good opportunity. Like, it was not a good experience. And because you open up that open-ended question and they want to spill their guts, right? So maybe it was a social worker at a hospital saying, oh, we referred, one of our discharging patients to XY, and they don't necessarily have to say which company, but a company. Yeah. And they were late. They didn't show up to transition them home. That person ended up being readmitted to the hospital, which again, in turn is a bad reflection on their discharge. So, I mean, they end up telling you all this stuff. This is just like building a opportunity for you and saying like, all right, bullet point all these items. It's like, okay, now how is my company going to not do all this stuff? How can we bridge the gap? How are we the solution for those pain points? And if you can do that effectively, I think honestly, I always ask, those open-ended questions because people will tell their story. Yeah. But I think it's also important to understand, like, asking the question, how many people on a monthly basis, weekly basis are you utilizing home care for? Because if they're going to come up and be upfront and say, well, we usually discharge, 20 patients a week, about half of them are going home with home care, then you already have a number in your head of what you're looking to accomplish. Yep,
qualifying that referral partner. Well, I love what you said too about giving people an opportunity to tell a story, because then that gives you the ability to like respond with a story, which bypasses all of the like logic I'm being sold to kind of brain, and is just like, hey, we're 2 people trying to collaborate and solve a problem together. Hey, thanks for sharing that. The reason people love working with us is because when we get the discharge paperwork or whatever, I'm talking out of stuff that I'm not an expert in at this point, but here's how we manage those things typically. I don't know, how does that align with what you were looking for?
Oh, it's absolutely right in line, right? It's telling that story again. Like anyone can read a brochure and say what we
Yep.
do, right? But telling the story of how we were successful by this a similar situation
Yep.
is really what's going to let you rise to the top. I used to call it the referral snowball effect, and
Mm.
I might term that terminology, but it's interesting. So a lot of people say like, okay, how do we celebrate our successes? And for me, it was always going back to the referral account and kind of like a bragging situation without being too, full of ourselves, but saying, hey, FYI, like, thank you so much for referring us, Mrs. Smith. Just want to let you know, we got her home safely. Her daughter didn't have to fly in. We took care of everything, and now we're on the road of recovery.
Yep.
And I just want to thank you so much. And the reason why I was so successful is because Mrs. Smith, had really bad ambulation problems and she was at risk when it came to transferring. And then the ask comes next. Can you think of anybody else like Mrs. Smith that would be discharging this week that could benefit from the same type of transitional care that we provided? And we call it the snowball effect because it continuously gives you the opportunity to go back into the account, tell the story of how this was successful,
Yep.
and then ask for a similar situation. I'm telling you, it's not rocket science. I mean, people could build a mega, mega, mega business with only a handful of accounts. It's just positioning yourself well to be able to put yourself in opportunities to win.
Yeah. Well, and I think just providing that feedback loop of, and I would guess most people are not doing this today, but discharge planners, they don't get to hear what's happened next. They might see, I'm having to discharge this same person again, but they're never going to hear if everything went well. They're not going to hear about that typically. And so, what a way to differentiate yourself as a collaborative partner that's going to give them a lot of peace of mind. So I think that's perfect.
Well, I think it's also important to realize a lot of people don't want to seem like they're bragging. And I don't really call it bragging. I call it storytelling because the more you can storytell, the more you can paint the picture of that next referral. And like you said earlier, collaborative. You want to celebrate the success, not like I did this. That social worker or that referral partner had such a big part that they trusted in you to be able to help with that transition or help with that care need. So let's celebrate that together. You and I both had a great experience, which in turn made it a good experience for that patient. The family's happy. Everyone, it's a win-win all around. So it's more about celebrating it collectively.
Well, and you used the word trust there, which is the third part of, right? People do business with folks that they know, like, and trust. Sure. And that trust piece, especially in this business, I think is so important, but it also takes time to develop.
Right. I would agree. And again, it's kind of cliche, the know, like, and trust, but trust is earned, right? And people don't understand that. We go into accounts all the time and we hope and pray that we just get to know people. And that's a big miss in my opinion. When I tell you a lot of my sales calls is with intention of understanding not just that opportunity of the referral, but getting to know our referral accounts. It's a relationship building, right? So it's like people are only going to really work with people they like and trust. How do I get to a level of commonality and trust? I can't tell you. I told this story just a couple of days ago. I used to call on this one assisted living, and there's a new executive director who is very hard to get into, very hard to get FaceTime with. And again, I was going in with the same approach of I'm not going to even really talk about what we do. I just want to get to know her. And quickly she invited me into her office and she sat me down. She's like, I seriously only have 5 minutes. And I'm like, great, what am I going to say in 5 minutes? You know what I mean?
Right.
And I said, I'm not really here to, tell you about what I do. I said, but you're new to my area. Where are you from? She's like, I'm from New Jersey. And I'm like, ding, I'm from New Jersey. Where? And kid you not, she only had 5 minutes, remember? Right?
Yep.
We ended up talking for an hour about where her kids went to college or were school, where I went to college. I think we played football against each other at some point during our high school. No joke. So from the person who said, I only have 5 minutes, after an hour long just chat, was able to build a relationship. She referred to me for years and years and years. And I have to like go back to that first meeting and say, I didn't go in there with all this information, like here's what we do, here's what we do. I just wanted to get to know her.
Yep.
And just because we had a small thing that was in common,
Yep.
open up those gates, and slowly over time, we built that relationship, earned that trust, and executed.
Yeah. Yeah. She had 5 minutes for a sales pitch, right? But she had an hour for a conversation.
That's it. 100%. Yep. That's so good. That's so good.
Well, thanks for sharing all of that. I think that that's going to be, really actionable for anybody listening to this who's responsible for sales, marketing, referral partnerships, those kinds of things. The next thing I want to talk about is something that you see as really underrated in the industry. So it's something that people often overlook, they don't value highly enough, and that you think that it's way better than it's generally seen to be.
It's interesting. And you and I were just talking about this offline. Our industry is pretty fast paced, depending on your referral sources, right? In my world, in the 10 years that I was in home care, we did a lot of work out of the hospitals, rehabs, skilled nursing facilities. So a lot of our referrals need care now. And I think speed to the first shift is very important. However, due diligence is equally important. So when we would go in and do, our assessments, I understand the urgency of being able to get care and get it fast. However, I think so many people underrate certain aspects of that assessment. So we're so heads down on what are the ADL support that they need. They help need in the shower? Do they need help ambulating, getting on their clothes in the morning? But there's a whole other side of that assessment that I think is completely underrated, and that's that social component. And I'll tell you a story. So I once had a client that we were onboarding, and the daughter flew in for a short period of time. She was very pressed for time, and she needed to get care instated because she had to jump on a plane and get back home. Our assessments were anywhere between like an hour and a half to 2 hours. We like to keep them in that sweet spot. So she's like rushing me through this assessment, and we were talking about the black and white ADL support that mom needed, which is very crucial. But then I went down, and we always did this as a differentiator. We went down this other path of like social and enrichment opportunities. We actually built a life enrichment program to help like bridge the gap for some of those things. So I would go down a question and answer, phase of our assessment, understanding who mom is. What did she do for a living? What are the hobbies that she did while she worked or as a parent or after, retirement? Those are the things that I wanted to uncover to see how we can add value in her day-to-day visits. And it was interesting. The daughter who was there at the time didn't want anything to do with it. And she kept on saying, Mom is 90 years old. She can't do any of the stuff that she used to do. And I had to stop her, and I was talking to the daughter. I said, you are thinking about mom without care. You're thinking of mom down here in Southwest Florida with no help, and you're thousands of miles away. Your perception of her can't is now different that we have care coming in. So that, for instance, was mom used to love to bake. And I said, well, okay, we're going to put in an enrichment opportunity into her care plan that we set up a program where we go on Mondays and we go take her to the grocery store and they get the ingredients. Wednesdays, we're going to have the baking, and then maybe Fridays is the day that we go around the neighborhood and hand it out to all of her friends. And the daughter was like just taken back. She's like, there's no way mom's going to do that. And I said, again, you have now a caregiver coming into the home to be able to help with this entire process. And so I kind of pushed on it because that social component is so important. I kid you not, that client looked forward to every single week having that experience of having a plan, going, getting the ingredients, baking on Wednesday, and then delivering to all of her friends in the neighborhood. They did that for over a year, every single week, and that's what she became known for. But the reality is we're always so caught up on the black and white, like what tasks have to be done, is we miss this whole piece of the assessment that is so important. We always say patient-centered care or, having a client in mind. really going over and beyond of the expectations is what's really going to let you win in those situations. The client was happy. It was enjoyable for the caregiver, right? Because she's actually doing something engaging and she's seeing a difference in someone who, again, has been told, no, she can't do this for so long. Now she can. So if I were to say anything's underrated is people's ability to really look past just the ADL support and really get to know your clients so you can enhance your level of care and ultimately have a better experience that no other agency is probably doing.
Yeah. Well, and starting from where you're talking about starting from, I think is such a good way to get back to the reason that most people are in this business in the first place, which is to provide a very, not just a competent level of service that addresses health issues, but to do something that is very human and is very compassionate and, life enriching. Most people have a personal story on why, and they got into it because, mom's care, we had to pitch in, we had all these challenges, we had all these problems, it was inconsistent, it was unreliable. And so I got into this business so that other people wouldn't have the same experience that we did. And, what a great opportunity to start with. Okay, what are the ADLs? Got to tick that box. Got to make sure those are taken care of. But then what else are we able to do? And that's a differentiator in the sales process. Gosh, doesn't that make the experience for the caregiver, if that fits a good one, so much better? Mm-hmm. I go sit with an old person. No, that's not what I do. I help Mrs. Smith bake. And, of course, I'm doing all this other stuff, making sure she's safe, et cetera, et cetera. But the highlight of her week and my week is that we're doing all this stuff together.
Yep. You're creating an experience. When you think about home care, it could be so boring. It can be so task-oriented. Creating an experience I'm telling you, it will be a huge differentiator if you do it correctly.
I love that. So let's move to, we talked about a big mistake that you've made in your career, but what's a little mistake that you see owners making all the time? And if they stopped, it'd make their lives or their businesses like 10 times better.
Yeah, hands down, I know this one is crucial. And little mistakes I see all the time that home care owners or nurse registry owners, they don't have a good pulse on is having checkpoints with their caregivers. And I mean that wholeheartedly. I've always been taught if you take care of your people, the people will take care of your clients, right? And it's cliche to a certain extent, but our world is a little bit hard, right? Because we're not confined to a building. We don't have an office where we have a great pulse on every single person who's working for us or what they're doing. So being super intentional of having those touch points with your caregivers is so important. In so many cases, as I said, our industry is a fast-paced environment in some situations. You send out a caregiver to do a start of care, all of a sudden you put them on a schedule, and the beautiful thing in some respect is like sometimes you can set it and forget it, but that I honestly get sick to my stomach when I think about that, because it's like, no, we have to be so intentional to check in with those caregivers, see if they need more equipment, what's the pain points that they're having, being really intentional of being able to connect with them on a way that can enhance their experience. I think it's so important. So, and it's the thing, especially when you're growing fast, sometimes that stuff gets put onto the back burner so often, right? Yeah. But I can't tell you how important it is. Investing the time and resources into your employees, is uber important, because if not, what happens? The trickle-down effect, right? Then they start to underperform, your family start to complain, and it comes all the way back full circle. And then to find out that there's certain little things that you could have done differently in the process to make sure that caregiver felt empowered, felt like they had enough resources, felt that they were supported enough. There's something to be said about really taking close eye at that opportunity to not just build a relationship with your employee, but make sure that they feel that they're getting enough support to be able to execute at a high level. And sometimes, it is time, right? And it is making sure you call them into the office and say, like, let's just have a recap. The hardest thing for home care agencies or caregivers, I would say, is, when they get called into the office, it's usually about something bad, right? And I saw this for years. And it's like we would spot check and call, a set of our caregivers into the office just to touch base with them. And they would always get freaked out. And like, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? Is everything okay? And I'm like, gosh, like, why do they feel that way? And I think they felt that way for years and years and years because the perspective of coming into the office is because they're being reprimanded. Where it's like, no, we're just trying to make sure that you feel supported. How can we as an agency do our job to make sure that you feel like you're being supported? So, I mean, I would say that would probably be like mistakes that are oversought just because people aren't being intentional.
Yeah. And, one of the things that we hear all the time when we're talking to owners is, our caregivers really only hear from us if they've done something wrong or if we need something from them. We need a last minute shift picked up or, those kinds of things. And so, using a tool like ours to make sure that visibility is there, that those kinds of things are part of the operations is so important. So an example of that is we'll set up a workflow where every time somebody works a brand new case with a new client they haven't worked with before, we've got a survey that automatically goes out, checks how the client fit was. Did they have all the training they needed? Did they have all the equipment that they needed? And then if there are any red flags on that, that's going to flag it for a scheduler or somebody from HR to reach out and say, hey, I noticed this. Tell me more about that. How can we resolve this issue? And just get it out proactively in front of those issues and make sure that people feel supported, they feel seen, and they feel valued.
Well, like I said before, people think it's a daunting task to be able to do it, but utilizing resources, to be able to help bridge that gap, you have to think outside the box and stop putting it to the back burner, right? It is an important part of the operations and process.
I love it. All right. Well, we've talked a lot about mistakes and things that go wrong and all those sorts of things, but I like to end on a high note. And so what's something that's happened lately in your business that you're really proud of?
It was fun. Last week I was out at a conference in St. Petersburg and, as an exhibitor, you have the opportunity to set up your table and have, samples and collateral about what I do. And there's probably about 175 to 200, home care companies. And, it's interesting. Looking from afar, I look like just the promo guy, right? I have my pens, my chip clips, my pads. And what was fun is actually having good conversation and educating them that I have 10 years of home care experience. I've been in those shoes before. So I would say a huge win is having those meaningful conversations about, I'm not your average print guy. I want to go deep in strategy. I want to talk, like nothing makes me happier is when I get the phone call from one of my clients and say, hey, Adam, I have an in-service coming up next month. Let's create a flyer. Let's create a brochure, a rack card, and a promotional component to be able to execute that at a high level. That just makes me like so extremely happy to be able to go deep in that relationship. And again, you don't get that at Staples. You can't really get that at Vistaprint, right? I want to work with the home care owners and being able to elevate, no pun intended, that experience to be able to execute,
That's great. This is going to publish on October 15th. And so with that in mind, what do you want to plug?
We're coming into Q4, right? And I think it's important, we have Thanksgiving right around the corner. We have the holidays right around the corner. This is the best time of year to really be intentional of highlighting a couple of things, and that's recognition for your caregivers and recognition to your referral sources. So right now we're heads down on being able to come up with really great viable strategies to be able to go through the season and execute well, to be able to give thanks and gratitude to the people who allow us to continue to do what we do. And that's hands down going to be our caregivers and then our collaborative referral partners.
That's great. Well, we'll go to the last segment here, which is home care hot take. And I want to ask you some specifics about how organizations can make sure they do a great job in Q4. So with the holidays coming up, what are the best opportunities to build relationships?
Yeah, I think honestly, it comes down to when and I've said it a couple times now, is about being intentional. We honestly always did a year in review opportunity. And what I mean by that is we would take our top 15 referral partners at year end and be able to go and have a recap and celebrate that again collectively. If it was a CCRC, maybe having a meeting and just saying, hey, did you know? And bring statistics with you. We supported 35 of your residents this year that resulted in 2,000 hours collectively. We saw 14 transitions into the community that went very, very well. Celebrate those successes. I think that year in review means a lot to accounts, more than you'd think. But it also gives you the opportunity not just to build and strengthen that relationship, but it also reminds them wait, my agency is a key component to our overall success. So I always looked at Q4 as an opportunity, but specifically around the holidays, being able to show that recognition, but also cap the year and being able to continue that relationship in a strong manner.
That's great. So as people think about promotional items, how to get their brand out there, what are some of the best and worst promotional items?
It's one of my favorite questions of all time. And I when I look at promotional items or gifts for that matter, I look at three things. And I've said this a bunch of times. I look at quality, right? I look at utility, and I look at shelf life. Those three things. If I can check all those boxes, it's a win. And I mean that because you want to be intentional about the stuff that you're buying, whether it's a gift or a promotional item, making sure it's good quality, people are actually using it, and they're using it for a long time. So a good example would be this is one of these, water cups, the 40 ounce big, Stanley-ish cups, have been one of my most popular items for the last 2 years. People use their water cups every single day. It has a good utility, it's good quality, and people are going to use it for a long time. I remember early on in my career, towards the end of the year, we did some recognition for one of our top 10 accounts, and we invested in Yeti cups. But that was before Stanley cups came out or what have you. And I tell you not, years later had gone by, and we did a luncheon for their office, and the doctor is still using that cup. And I was mind blown. I even made a comment. I said, doctor, whatever. I said, you're still using our cup from 3 years ago. He goes, oh, I don't leave the house without it. He goes, this is my cup. And if you think at consumer behavior and how people operate, they're big on, patterns and being able to have consistency. So people just our human nature is to have something regular and structured. So it's and people don't think about this, right? So it's if you can invest in something that people are going to use over time, it's definitely worth the investment.
Do you have a slam dunk promotional item?
Well, another one that I love, direct to consumer. Again, it's being intentional of understanding your audience. So what we would do, this is my kind of hidden secret promotional item. It's a walker bag, right? So it has little Velcro hooks, and it hooks to the front of a walker bag, and it's intended to be functional so they can put all their stuff in it. Now, I'll tell you, this is my secret. I used to go and book ice cream socials or happy hours at all of our assisted livings, memory care communities, and CCRCs. We would do a marketing blitz. We would get about 1,000 of these and do a marketing blitz and schedule 2 or 3 or 4, happy hours every single week. And as they all came in, they lined up all their walkers on the side of the room, right? And, as they're eating their ice cream or having their cocktail, depending on the audience, right, I would say, hey, I got you this great prize, little gift that we're going to attach to the front of your walker. And it was almost like I'm going to do it for you kind of opportunity. And so I was and the great thing is you could, I open it up and they could put their tissues in, their lip balm, cell phone, everything you could think of. And they loved it. So going direct consumer with a promotional item was very impactful. Now, very rarely can you say, that promotional item got me a referral, right? But kid you not, for years, we would get phone calls from family members within that community saying, and we always did a good job of understanding where our business was coming, right? Like where our referrals coming from. And I remember distinctly a couple times I would ask that family member, and they said, Adam, you're a walking billboard in mom's community. Like, we see your little bags all over the place. Yeah. So, like, again, when it goes back to, like, being intentional, again, this is something that was, like, a really thought out project and executed very well, which had direct results. And I'm pretty sure, like, you really can't find these anywhere else. So, I mean, if people are interested, I mean, they're happy to reach out to us. We work directly with the manufacturer.
That was going to be my question, is if people want those and they search for them and they can't find them, it sounds like if they give you a call, you can help them out. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, it's not a product that you can find easily available online. So I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Adam, thanks again for making the time to meet today and to record. It's been a really fun conversation and really appreciate your time.
I enjoyed it greatly, and I look forward to seeing what we can do together in the future.
Awesome. Same here. On behalf of the team here at Ava, thanks for listening to our show. We'll be back next week with another episode. So make sure you subscribe wherever you listen. If you have feedback on the show, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or send us an email to podcast@joinava.com. Thanks. And remember, the year may be 2024, but hindsight is always 2020.